was 13 years old the night I decided to end it all behind a dumpster in Cleveland, Ohio. That's not where this story starts, though. It starts 3 hours earlier, when I was still stupid enough to think I could make it on my own. The rain came down in sheets that evening, the kind of cold rain that seeps through your clothes and settles into your bones. I'd been on the streets for 47 days. I know because I counted every single one of them, scratching marks into the inside cover of a water-damaged notebook I'd found in a trash can. 47 days since I ran from the foster home. 47 days since Mr. Henderson came into my room that night with that look in his eyes. I was curled up in the doorway of a closed laundromat on East 55th Street, my entire body shaking so hard my teeth clattered together. My sneakers had holes in them, and I couldn't feel my toes anymore. That scared me more than the hunger, more than the men who sometimes followed me down dark streets, more than the cold itself. When you stop feeling things, that's when you know you're losing. "Please," I whispered to a woman hurrying past with an umbrella. "Please, I just need—" She didn't even look at me. Nobody ever did. I'd learned that in 47 days, you could become invisible. Just another piece of trash on the street that people stepped over without thinking twice. That's when I heard them. The rumbles started low, like distant thunder, then grew louder until it vibrated in my chest. Motorcycles. A lot of them. I pressed myself further back into the doorway, making myself as small as possible. I'd heard things about biker gangs. About what they did to young girls, about how you disappeared if they noticed you. 7 bikes turned the corner, their headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights. They pulled up to the curb right in front of the building next to the laundromat, and my heart hammered so hard, I thought it might break through my ribs. The engines cut off one by one, and suddenly, the street was quieter. Just the sound of rain hitting pavement, and my own terrified breathing. The riders climbed off their bikes, and even in the darkness and rain, I could see they were huge. Leather jackets, boots, tattoos creeping up their necks. One of them, the one who'd been leading the pack, was bigger than the rest. Even soaked with rain, he had this presence that made you want to either run or stay perfectly still, like a rabbit that spotted a wolf. He was pulling off his helmet when his eyes swept across the street and landed on me. I stopped breathing. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. His face was hard, weathered, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. His beard was thick and dark, streaked with gray. He had to be at least 40, maybe older. Everything about him screamed danger. "Hawk!" one of the other bikers called out. "We going in or what? I'm freezing my—" Hawk held up one hand, and the other biker went silent immediately. He didn't take his eyes off me. Then, slowly, he started walking across the street. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But my legs wouldn't work. I was frozen, pressed back against the metal door of the laundromat, watching this mountain of a man cross the empty street through the rain. He moved with this careful deliberateness, like he was approaching a scared animal, which, I guess, is exactly what I was. He stopped about 5 feet away, and even in the dim light from the street lamps, I could see his eyes more clearly now. They were gray, like storm clouds, and they studied me with an intensity that made me want to disappear completely. "How long you been out here, kid?" His voice was rough, like gravel, but quieter than I expected. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat had closed up completely. He tilted his head slightly, water dripping from his beard. "You got somebody? Parents? Somebody looking for you?" I shook my head, just barely. "You running from something? Or running to something?" That question broke something in me. A sob tried to claw its way up my throat, but I choked it back down. I wouldn't cry. I hadn't cried in 47 days, and I wasn't going to start now. Not in front of this stranger. Not in front of anyone. But he must have seen something in my face because his expression shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but something changed in those storm cloud eyes. "What's your name?" "Riley," I whispered. It was the first word I'd spoken out loud in 3 days. "Riley." He repeated it like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. "I'm Hawk. How old are you?" 13. Something flickered across his face. Anger maybe, but not at me. He looked back at his crew, who were all watching now from under the awning of whatever building they'd stopped at. Then he looked back at me, and I saw him make some kind of decision. "You eaten today?" I shook my head. "Yesterday?" Another head shake. Actually, I wasn't sure when I'd last eaten. Time had gotten weird lately, all blurring together into one long stretch of cold and fear and hunger. Hawk was quiet for a moment, just standing there in the rain, getting soaked. Then he did something that shocked me completely. He shrugged out of his leather jacket and held it out to me. "Put this on." I stared at the jacket like it might bite me. This had to be a trick. This was how it happened, right? Someone offers you something, gains your trust, and then... "Kid, I got 3 daughters," Hawk said, and his voice was even quieter now. "Oldest one's about your age. If she was standing in a doorway in the rain, looking like she'd forgotten what hope felt like, I'd want someone to help her. So put on the damn jacket before we both catch pneumonia." The mention of daughters did something to me, made him seem more real, more human. Less like the monster my imagination had created. With shaking hands, I reached out and took the jacket. It was still warm from his body heat, and it smelled like leather and motor oil, and something else I couldn't name. Safety, maybe. It swallowed me completely when I put it on, so big that the sleeves hung past my hands and the hem hit my knees. "Come on," Hawk said, jerking his head toward the building where his crew waited. "Let's get some food in you, get you warmed up. Then we'll figure out what comes next." "I don't have money," I said quickly. "Did I ask you for money?" I can't pay you back for food, or..." The words stuck in my throat. The things I'd seen people have to do for food, for a place to sleep, for kindness that always had a price. Hawk's jaw tightened like he understood exactly what I was trying not to say. "Nobody's asking you to pay for anything, Riley. You're a kid who needs help. That's it. That's the whole story. If you're watching this, and you've ever been in a moment where someone offered you kindness when you'd forgotten it existed, hit that like button. Because you'll understand what happened to me next. That tiny flame of hope I'd been trying so hard to keep extinguished because hope hurt too much when it got crushed, it flickered back to life. I followed Hawk across the street. His crew watched me approach with expressions I couldn't read. There were 6 of them, all big men in leather and denim, covered in tattoos and road grime. The building they'd stopped at turned out to be a bar, but not the kind I'd imagined. The sign above the door read, "The Iron Horse," in faded letters, and warm light spilled from the windows. "This is Riley," Hawk announced to his crew, his hand hovering near my shoulder but not quite touching, like he understood I might bolt at any second. "She's going to eat with us. Anyone got a problem with that?" The way he said it made it clear there better not be any problems. A woman emerged from the group, and I realized with surprise that not everyone in the crew was male. She was shorter than the men, but just as tough-looking, with bleached blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and rings on almost every finger. She looked me up and down with sharp green eyes. "Jesus, Hawk, she's just a baby," the woman said, and there was something fierce in her voice. "How long's she been out?" "Long enough," Hawk replied. The woman's expression hardened. She stepped closer to me, and I flinched without meaning to. She froze immediately, holding her hands up like I was a spooked horse. "Easy, honey. I'm Raven. I don't bite, I promise." She smiled, and it transformed her whole face, made her look younger and kinder. "Why don't we get you inside where it's warm, okay? Get some food in your belly?" The inside of the Iron Horse was nothing like I expected. It was rough around the edges, sure, with dark wood and neon beer signs and a pool table in the corner, but it was clean, warm. The smell of cooking food hit me so hard, my knees almost buckled. When was the last time I'd smelled food cooking? Real food, not garbage or the faint scent of something wafting from a restaurant I couldn't afford to enter? Hawk guided me to a booth in the back, away from the handful of other patrons scattered around the bar. Raven slid in next to me while Hawk took the seat across from us. The rest of his crew dispersed to other tables in the bar itself, but I could feel them all keeping an eye on us. On me. A waitress appeared, older woman with kind eyes and smile lines. "Hey, Hawk, usual for you and the crew?" "Yeah, but bring whatever she wants first." He nodded at me. "Anything on the menu, kid. Whatever you want." I stared at the plastic menu she handed me, but the words swam together. I couldn't remember the last time someone asked me what I wanted to eat. In the foster homes, you ate what was put in front of you, or you didn't eat. On the streets, you ate what you could find or steal. Choice wasn't part of the equation. "How about we start with some soup?" Raven suggested gently. "Something warm to start, easy on your stomach, then maybe a burger and fries after?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The waitress smiled and disappeared. Hawk was watching me with those intense gray eyes, and I couldn't hold his gaze. I focused on the table instead, on the water rings and scratches in the wood, on anything but the scrutiny of this stranger who'd shown me more kindness in 10 minutes than I'd received in months. "So," Hawk said, his voice careful, "you want to tell me what you're running from?" And there it was. The question I'd known was coming. The price for the warm jacket and the promise of food. My story, my pain, my shame, served up for a stranger's judgment. But before I could figure out how to answer, before I could decide how much truth was safe to tell, the door to the bar burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. 2 police officers stood in the doorway, rain dripping from their uniforms. Their eyes scanning the room with that particular kind of alertness that made my blood turn to ice. "We're looking for a runaway," one of them called out, pulling out a piece of paper, a photograph. 13-year-old girl, last seen in this area. Brown hair, about 5 feet tall." He kept talking, but I couldn't hear him anymore over the roaring in my ears. They'd found me. Somehow, after 47 days, they'd found me. They were going to take me back. Back to Mr. Henderson and his wandering hands. Back to the foster home where nobody believed me when I tried to tell them what happened in the dark. Back to the place where I'd learned that survival sometimes meant you had to run. My whole body started shaking again, but this time it had nothing to do with the cold. Under the table, Raven's hand found mine and squeezed. Not hard, just enough to let me know she was there. Across from us, Hawk's expression hadn't changed, but something dangerous had entered his eyes. He didn't look at me. Instead, he looked at the police officers, his face perfectly neutral, perfectly calm. The officers were moving through the bar now, showing the photograph to people, asking questions. They were 3 tables away. 2 tables. 1 table. They were right next to our booth. One of the officers looked down at me, and I watched recognition start to dawn on his face. His hand moved toward his radio. That's when Hawk did something that would change everything. Tell me in the comments what you think Hawk should do next. Should he protect Riley even though it means lying to police? And if you've ever had someone stand up for you when you needed it most, share your story below. Hit subscribe because the next chapter is going to break your heart even more. I promise you that. The officer's eyes locked onto mine, and I watched his brain make the connection. His mouth started to open, his hand already reaching for the radio clipped to his shoulder. That's my daughter. Hawk's voice cut through the moment like a knife, calm and steady and absolutely certain. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move, just sat there in that booth looking at the officer with the kind of quiet authority that made you believe every word out of his mouth. The officer's hand paused mid-reach. Your daughter? That's right. Hawk leaned back in the booth, one arm stretched along the back of the seat, completely relaxed. Riley just picked her up from her friend's house. Why? I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Couldn't do anything but sit there frozen while this stranger lied to a police officer for me. For me. A kid he'd met 15 minutes ago in a doorway. The second officer stepped closer, studying me with narrowed eyes. He was older, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much to trust easy answers. She have ID on her? She's 13, Hawk said, and there was the faintest edge to his voice now. How many 13-year-olds you know carry ID? School ID, the older officer pressed. Something with her name on it? My heart was slamming so hard against my ribs, I thought everyone in the bar must be able to hear it. I had nothing. No ID, no proof, no story that would hold up under questioning. This was it. This was where it all fell apart. Raven's hand squeezed mine harder under the table, and then she spoke up. Her voice bright and casual, like we were having the most normal conversation in the world. Oh, sweetie, did you leave your backpack at Madison's again? I swear, you'd forget your head if it wasn't attached. She was giving me an out, a story, a lifeline. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Hawk pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness, scrolling through it like he had all the time in the world. Look, officers, I appreciate you doing your job. Missing kids, that's serious business. But this is my daughter. She's fine, and we're just trying to have dinner. Unless you've got probable cause to think otherwise? The way he said it wasn't aggressive, but there was steel underneath. A quiet reminder that he knew his rights and wasn't going to be pushed around. The younger officer looked at his partner, uncertain. The older one studied me for what felt like an eternity, his eyes moving from my face to Hawk's and back again. I could see him doing the math, looking for the resemblance, and there wasn't any, of course. Hawk was white with dark hair going gray, weathered skin, those storm cloud eyes. I had lighter brown hair, darker skin that spoke to the Mexican heritage from my mom's side that I barely remembered, brown eyes that were nothing like his. She doesn't look much like you, the older officer observed. Something flickered across Hawk's face, too quick for me to read. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, and there was a weight to it that hadn't been there before. She takes after her mother, my late wife. The way he said it, the grief that touched those 2 words, made even the suspicious officer pause. It was like Hawk had reached into something real and painful and used it to make the lie more believable. Later, I would wonder about that. Wonder if there really had been a wife, if that pain was real or just a performance. But in that moment, it worked. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "Sorry for your loss, sir." Hawk just nodded, jaw tight. The older officer wasn't quite ready to give up, though. He looked directly at me, and his voice softened just a little. "Miss, you okay? You want to be here?" It was a fair question, a good question, the kind of question someone who actually cared about missing kids would ask, and that made it so much harder to lie to him. But then I thought about going back, thought about Mr. Henderson's bedroom door opening in the night, thought about telling Mrs. Henderson what happened and watching her face go cold, watching her decide I was a liar and a troublemaker and probably wanted it anyway. Thought about being moved to another home where maybe it would be worse or maybe it would be the same. But either way, I'd just be shuffled through the system until I aged out or ran again or stopped existing in any meaningful way. I looked up at Hawk, at this stranger who'd given me his jacket and offered me food and was now lying to police for me, and I made a choice. "I'm okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is my dad. I want to be here." The older officer held my gaze for a few more seconds, and I forced myself not to look away. Finally, he sighed and tucked the photograph back into his pocket. "All right, sorry to bother you folks. Enjoy your dinner." They turned and headed back toward the door, and I thought we were clear, thought we'd made it. But then the older officer paused with his hand on the door handle and looked back at Hawk. "If that is your daughter," he said slowly, "you might want to get her to a doctor. She looks half-starved and hypothermic. That's the kind of thing that gets Child Protective Services interested in a family, if you understand what I'm saying." It was a warning and a threat wrapped up in concern, and everyone in the bar knew it. Hawk met his eyes steadily. "Appreciate the advice, officer. I'll take care of my kid." The officer held his gaze for another moment, then nodded and left, his partner following behind. The door swung shut, and the warm noise of the bar slowly returned to normal. But I couldn't relax, couldn't breathe right, couldn't believe what had just happened. Hawk let out a long breath and ran his hand over his face. When he looked at me again, some of that careful, neutral expression had cracked, and I could see something more complicated underneath. Worry, maybe, or anger at whatever situation had put me in that doorway. "That was stupid," he said quietly. "What I just did was incredibly stupid." "I'm sorry," I whispered, and I was. Sorry for bringing this to him. Sorry for putting him in this position. Sorry for existing and being a problem that other people had to deal with. "Don't." His voice was sharp enough that I flinched. He softened immediately, holding up a hand. "Don't apologize, Riley. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at whatever led to you sleeping in doorways in November." The soup arrived then, brought by the waitress who pretended not to notice the tension at our table. It was chicken noodle, steam rising from the bowl, and the smell of it made my stomach cramp with hunger so intense it was painful. "Eat," Raven said gently. "Slow though, okay? Your stomach's probably shrunk. Don't want you getting sick." I picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a sip. The broth was hot and salty and perfect, and I had to fight the urge to cry. You ever have something so simple make you realize how much you'd been missing? How much you'd lost? That's what that first spoonful of soup did to me. Hawk was quiet while I ate, just watching me with those intense eyes. The rest of his crew had gone back to their own conversations, but I could feel them stealing glances at our booth, wondering what their leader had just gotten himself into. After I'd finished half the bowl, Hawk leaned forward, his forearms on the table. "Okay, Riley, here's where we're at. I just lied to police for you, which means I'm now officially involved in whatever this situation is. So I need to know what I'm dealing with. Where'd you come from? Why are you running?" I set down my spoon, my appetite suddenly gone despite the hunger still gnawing at my insides. "If I tell you, you'll send me back. Maybe, maybe not, but you don't get to lie to me, not after what just happened. I need the truth." I looked at Raven, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Hawk, at this man who'd already risked something for me when he had no reason to. "Foster care," I said finally. "I was in foster care. The home in Cleveland, the Hendersons." "Was it bad?" Raven asked quietly. "They hurt you?" I stared at the remaining soup in my bowl, watching a noodle float in circles. "Mr. Henderson, he would come into my room at night. He didn't actually, but he would touch my hair and sit on the edge of my bed and tell me I was pretty and that he was the only one who really cared about me. And his hands would—" I couldn't finish, couldn't force those words out. Hawk's hand curled into a fist on the table, knuckles going white. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Did he rape you?" "No, but I knew he was going to. I could feel it building, you know? Every night he stayed a little longer, touched a little more. And I told Mrs. Henderson, and she said I was making it up for attention. Said I was troubled and trying to destroy their family. And then she put a lock on my door. But the lock was on the outside, and I knew what was coming." Raven made a sound like something breaking. Her hand found mine again and held on tight. "So I ran," I continued. "Went through the window one night and just ran. That was 47 days ago." 47 days, Hawk repeated, and there was something dangerous in his voice. "You're 13 years old, and you survived on the streets for 47 days. "I'm good at surviving." It came out defensive, proud even. It was all I had left, that pride in still being alive. "Yeah, you are," Hawk agreed. "You're tough as hell, kid, but you shouldn't have to be. No 13-year-old should have to be that tough." The burger arrived, and Raven pushed it toward me. "Eat more. We'll figure this out, but you need your strength." I picked up the burger with both hands, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Hot and greasy and perfect. I took a bite, and it was even better than the soup. Real food, solid food, the kind of food that reminded your body you were human, that you deserved to exist. While I ate, Hawk pulled out his phone for real this time and started texting someone. His thumbs moved fast over the screen, his expression focused and intense. "Who are you texting?" I asked, around a mouthful of burger. "Someone who might be able to help." He looked up at me. "I've got a friend who's a social worker. Good one, not like the useless ones who put you at the Hendersons. She works with kids who've been through bad situations. Might know what options we have." Fear shot through me. "You're turning me in." "No," Hawk said firmly. "I'm trying to figure out how to keep you safe without getting arrested for kidnapping. There's a difference." "I won't go back," I said, and I meant it. I'd run again. I'd sleep in doorways and starve and freeze, but I wouldn't go back. "I know," Hawk said quietly. "I believe you. But Riley, you can't live on the streets. You barely made it through 47 days. Winter's coming. You'd be dead before Christmas." The blunt truth of that hit me hard because I knew he was right. I'd known it even before tonight, sitting in that doorway and thinking about just stopping. Just letting the cold take me, because at least then it would be over. If you're still watching, if you've made it this far in the story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next, the decision Hawk makes, It's going to shock you.
And I need you here for Chapter 3 to see how this all plays out. Hawk's phone buzzed with a response. He read it, his jaw tightening, then typed something else. Another buzz, more typing. This went on for a few minutes while I finished the burger and started on the fries, eating slowly like Raven had instructed, even though I wanted to shove them all in my mouth at once. Finally, Hawk set his phone down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Okay," he said. "Here's the situation. My friend says legally, I'm supposed to report you to CPS immediately. They'll put you in emergency foster care while they investigate your claims about Henderson." "No." "Let me finish," Hawk interrupted. "That's what I'm supposed to do. What I'm going to do is take you home with me tonight, get you warm and fed properly, and give my friend time to do some digging into your case. See what the hell happened, why nobody protected you when you told them what was happening. Then we figure out next steps." I stared at him. "You'd do that? Just take me home? You don't even know me." "No, I don't. But I know you're 13 and scared, and you've been through hell, and I've got a house with a guest room that nobody's using. I've also got 3 daughters who'll probably mother you to death, but that's a different problem." "Your daughters?" I remembered him mentioning them earlier. "Won't they wonder why you brought home some random kid?" Something complicated crossed Hawk's face. "They'll understand. My oldest, Sarah, she's 15. When she was younger, before I got custody of her and her sisters, she went through some things in her mom's house. Things that left scars? So yeah, she'll understand exactly why you're there." The weight of what he was offering hit me all at once. A home, safety, even if it was just for one night, even if it all fell apart tomorrow, tonight I wouldn't be sleeping in a doorway. Tonight, I wouldn't be wondering if I'd wake up at all. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Hawk was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When Sarah finally told me what was happening at her mom's place, told me about her mom's boyfriend and what he'd done to her, I moved heaven and earth to get custody. Fought for 2 years, spent money I didn't have on lawyers, almost lost this bar because of legal fees. And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. But I still wake up some nights thinking about those 2 years she was suffering while I was fighting through the system. 2 years is a long time for a kid. Long enough to break something inside them that never quite heals right." He looked at me directly, and his eyes were fierce. "You told someone what was happening, and they didn't believe you. That's on them, not you. And now you're here, and I can help. So that's what I'm going to do. Simple as that." It wasn't simple, though. Nothing about this was simple. But I was too tired and too hungry and too desperate to question the gift I was being offered. "Okay," I said. "Okay, yes, thank you." Raven smiled, and it was bright and genuine. "You're going to fit right in, honey. Hawk's crew, we're all misfits and strays. You'll see." The rest of the crew came over to the booth then, formally introducing themselves. There was Bear, a huge man with a salt and pepper beard who looked scary until he smiled. Ghost, quiet and lean with eyes that noticed everything. Tommy, younger than the rest with laugh lines around his eyes. Crash, who apparently got his name from wrecking 3 bikes in 1 year. And then there was Raven, who owned the bar with Hawk and ran the place with an iron fist hidden in a velvet glove. They all treated me carefully, like I might break, but also with a casual acceptance that made something in my chest loosen. Nobody asked too many questions. Nobody looked at me with pity or disgust. They just accepted that I was there now, that Hawk had decided to help me, and that was enough for them. We left the bar around 10, and the rain had finally stopped. The night air was cold and crisp, and stars were trying to peek through the gaps in the clouds. Hawk draped his jacket over me again,
and I inhaled the smell of leather and safety.
"You ride with me,"
Hawk said, leading me to his bike. It was a beast of a machine, all black chrome and power.
"Ever been on a motorcycle before?"
I shook my head.
"Okay, here's the rules. You hold on to me tight, don't let go. When I lean, you lean with me. Don't fight it. And most important, you trust me to keep you safe."
Can you do that? Could I trust him? This stranger who'd lied to police for me, who'd fed me, who was taking me to his home where his daughters lived? It was insane. It was dangerous. It was the kind of thing that got girls killed in news stories. But when I looked into his eyes, I didn't see danger. I saw someone who understood what it meant to fight for a kid nobody else wanted to protect.
"Yeah," I said, "I can do that."
Hawk helped me onto the bike behind him, showing me where to put my feet, how to hold on. Then the engine roared to life beneath us, and even though I was terrified, I wrapped my arms around his waist and held on tight. We pulled away from the curb, the rest of the crew falling into formation around us, and for the first time in 47 days, I felt something other than fear. I felt possibility. The ride took about 20 minutes, heading out of the city and into the suburbs where houses had yards and driveways and basketball hoops. Normal houses where normal families lived normal lives. We pulled up to a 2-story house with blue siding and a porch light that glowed warm and welcoming. Home? I thought, and then immediately tried to crush that thought because hoping was dangerous. Hawk killed the engine and helped me off the bike. My legs were shaky, and my whole body was vibrating from the ride. The rest of the crew pulled up behind us, killing their engines one by one.
"Okay,"
Hawk said, looking at me seriously.
"My daughters are inside. They're going to have questions. I'm going to tell them you're staying with us for a while, and that's all they need to know right now. You don't have to tell them anything you're not ready to share. Understood?"
I nodded. He started toward the house, and I followed, my heart pounding. This was real. This was happening. In a few seconds, I'd be inside that house, meeting his daughters, stepping into a life that wasn't mine, but that I was being offered anyway. Hawk opened the front door, and light and warmth spilled out. I could hear voices inside, laughter, the sound of a TV playing. "Dad!" a girl's voice called out. "You're late. We already ate without you."
"Yeah, well, something came up,"
Hawk called back. He looked at me, gave me a reassuring nod, and then gestured for me to follow him inside. I stepped through the doorway into a living room that was lived in and messy in the way homes are when real people live there. Sneakers by the door, a coat rack overflowing with jackets, pictures on the walls showing smiling girls at various ages. 3 girls emerged from what must have been the kitchen. The oldest looked 15, like Hawk said, with long dark hair and her father's gray eyes. The middle one was maybe 11 or 12, with wild curly hair pulled into a ponytail. The youngest looked about 8, tiny and fierce with eyes that immediately locked onto me with curiosity. They all froze when they saw me, taking in my appearance. Hawk's too big jacket hanging on me, my wet hair, my hollow cheeks, the way I couldn't quite meet their eyes. The oldest girl, Sarah, looked from me to her father, and I watched understanding dawn on her face. She'd been there, Hawk said. She knew what running looked like. "Who's this?" the middle daughter asked, not unkindly. Hawk put his hand on my shoulder, gentle but grounding. "This is Riley. She's going to be staying with us for a while." "Why?" the youngest asked with the brutal honesty of children. "Because she needs help," Hawk said simply. "And we help people who need it. That's what this family does." Sarah was still studying me with those storm cloud eyes, so like her father's. Then she smiled. Small but genuine, and said, "Cool.
I call not sharing my room, though. She can have the guest room. Already planned on it, Hawk replied. The middle daughter bounced forward, all energy and warmth. I'm Maya. Do you like video games? I just got this new... Maya, give her space, Sarah interrupted. She probably wants to shower and sleep, not get interrogated about video games. I was just being friendly, Maya protested, but she backed off a little. The youngest girl, who hadn't introduced herself yet, walked right up to me and looked up with serious eyes. Did someone hurt you? The room went silent. Emma, Hawk said in a warning tone, but Emma ignored him, still looking at me. Because if someone hurt you, my dad will make them sorry. He's really good at that. And somehow, that childish promise of protection delivered with such certainty made my eyes burn with tears I'd been holding back for 47 days. I managed to nod, just once, and Emma nodded back like we'd made some kind of pact. Okay, she said. You can stay as long as you want then. If only it were that simple. If only an 8-year-old's fierce protection could keep the world at bay. But as I stood there in that warm house, surrounded by this family of strangers who were offering me shelter, I let myself believe it could be that simple. Just for tonight. What I didn't know was that across town, someone was making a phone call. Someone who'd seen me at the bar and recognized me from the police description. Someone who believed they were doing the right thing by reporting what they'd seen. And by morning, everything would change again. The knock on the door came at 7 a.m., sharp and official and impossible to ignore. I knew immediately it wasn't a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. I'd been awake for hours anyway, lying in the guest room bed that was softer than anything I'd slept on in months, staring at the ceiling and waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because that's what always happened, right? You got comfortable, you let yourself believe things might be okay, and then reality kicked the door down and reminded you that girls like me didn't get happy endings. The guest room was on the second floor, and through the thin walls I could hear movement in Hawk's room across the hall. He'd heard the knock too. I listened to his heavy footsteps cross the floor, heard the creak of his door opening. "Stay in your room," he said quietly, and I realized he was talking to me. That he somehow knew I was awake and listening. "Whatever happens, stay in your room until I tell you it's okay." I didn't answer, but I heard him pause outside my door like he was waiting to make sure I'd understood. Then his footsteps headed down the stairs, steady and deliberate. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could. I was still wearing the clothes from yesterday, had been too afraid to change into the pajamas Sarah had lent me because sleeping in someone else's clothes felt too permanent, too much like accepting something I might have ripped away. Moving to the door, I cracked it open just enough to hear what was happening downstairs. "Mr. Daniels?" A woman's voice, professional and clipped. "I'm Jennifer Morrison with Child Protective Services. This is Officer Chen. We received a report that you have a minor staying in your home. A runaway named Riley Martinez." My stomach dropped. Martinez? That was my last name, the one from my birth certificate that I never used because nobody ever called me anything but Riley. They knew who I was. They knew I was here. "It's 7 a.m. Hawk's voice was calm but cold. "You have a warrant to be knocking on my door this early?" "We don't need a warrant for a wellness check on a child, Mr. Daniels. Is Riley Martinez here?" There was a pause, and I held my breath. "Who told you she was?" "We're not at liberty to discuss our sources. But we were informed that you claimed she was your daughter during a police encounter last night, and that raised some red flags when we cross-referenced it with your actual family composition. So I'll ask again,
Is Riley Martinez in this house? Footsteps on the stairs behind me made me jump. I turned to see Sarah standing there in pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt, her hair messy from sleep. She looked at me, then at her door where the conversation was still filtering up, and her expression hardened into something fierce. "Come on," she whispered, grabbing my arm gently and pulling me toward her room. "Quick." "But your dad said—" "My dad's dealing with them. You don't need to hear this." She pulled me into her room and closed the door softly. Her room was like any teenage girl's room. Walls covered with posters of bands I didn't recognize, clothes scattered on the floor, a laptop open on her desk. Normal. So achingly normal it made my chest hurt. Sarah sat down on her bed and patted the space next to her. I perched on the edge, my whole body tense and ready to run even though I had nowhere to go. "It's going to be okay," Sarah said, and she sounded so sure that I almost believed her. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do, because I know my dad, and when he decides to protect someone, he doesn't give up. Trust me on that." Downstairs, I could hear Hawk's voice rising slightly, still controlled, but with an edge to it now. "I need to see some identification before I let you in my house. I need to know you are who you say you are." "Of course." There was rustling, the sound of credentials being produced. "Now, may we come in?" A long pause, then, "Fine, but you talk to me first, not the kid. She's been through enough without getting interrogated first thing in the morning." The front door closed, and footsteps moved into what I remembered was the living room. I could hear voices but couldn't make out words anymore, just the low murmur of serious conversation. Sarah was watching me with those gray eyes that were so like her father's. "You want to tell me what happened? Dad gave us the basics last night after you went to bed, but I'm guessing there's more to it." "Why do you care?" It came out harsher than I meant it, defensive. Sarah didn't flinch. "Because I was you. Different details, same story. Someone hurt me, nobody believed me, and my dad had to fight like hell to get me out. So, yeah, I care." There was something in her voice, a shared understanding that went deeper than words. She'd been there. She knew what it felt like to tell the truth and be called a liar. To be a kid nobody wanted to protect. "Foster home," I said quietly. "The dad he was working up to something." I could feel it, so I ran before he could finish what he started. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Good, running was smart. Staying would have been worse." "CPS doesn't think so. They think I'm just a troubled kid making up stories." "CPS thought my mom's boyfriend was a great guy too. Charming, held down a steady job, volunteered at church, took them 2 years to finally believe me over him." Sarah's voice was bitter. "The system's broken, but my dad, he's not broken. He'll figure this out." Downstairs, Hawk's voice rose enough that we could hear him clearly. "I don't give a damn what your protocol is. She told people Henderson was inappropriate with her, and nobody protected her. So she protected herself the only way she knew how. And now you want to put her right back in the system that failed her? Mr. Daniels, I understand your concern. But no, I don't think you do understand. I understand. I fought this same fight for my daughter. I know exactly how this works. You'll put Riley in emergency foster care while you investigate. Could take weeks, could take months. And in the meantime, she's with strangers who might be great or might be the next Henderson. Those are stakes you're gambling with, not me. We have protocols in place. Your protocols failed her once already." There was something in Hawk's voice that made my throat tight. He was fighting for me. This man who'd met me less than 12 hours ago was fighting for me like I mattered, like I was worth protecting. Maya appeared in Sarah's doorway, her curly hair even wilder than last night, Emma right behind her. They both looked worried. "What's happening?" Maya whispered. "Who's downstairs?" "CPS," Sarah said flatly. "Someone reported that Riley's here." Emma's face scrunched up in anger. "But Dad said she could stay." "It's not that simple, Em. It should be." Emma crossed her arms. "She needs help. We're helping her. Why do adults always make things so complicated?" I almost smiled despite everything. 8 years old and already fed up with the system's bureaucracy. The social worker's voice drifted up the stairs, calmer now, trying a different approach. "Mr. Daniels, I can see you care about this girl's welfare. That's admirable. But the fact remains, you have no legal standing here. No guardianship, no custody, no familial relationship. If you continue to keep her here without reporting her to the proper authorities, that's interfering with a dependency case." "That's a crime." "Then arrest me." Hawk's voice was flat and hard. "Go ahead. Arrest me for giving a kid a safe place to sleep and a hot meal. I'm sure that'll look great in the papers." Silence. The social worker was probably weighing her options, trying to figure out how to handle this man who wasn't following the script she expected. "Nobody wants to arrest you, Mr. Daniels. We just want to ensure Riley's safety and well-being. If you could just let us speak with her?" "No." The single word was absolute. Not without a lawyer present. Not without someone who's on her side, not the system's side. "We are on her side?" "Are you? Were you on her side when she told people Henderson was coming into her room at night? Were you on her side when his wife called her a liar? Where were you then?" I heard the social worker take a breath, trying to maintain her professional composure. "Those are serious allegations that will be investigated thoroughly, but right now, I need to ensure Riley is safe, and she is safe. She's in my house, she's fed, she's warm, and nobody here is going to hurt her. That's more than your system gave her." The officer, who'd been silent up until now, finally spoke, his voice tired. "Look, Daniels, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way? You let Ms. Morrison talk to the girl, we verify she's okay, and we work something out. The hard way? I arrest you for obstruction and we take the girl anyway. Your choice." My hands were shaking. This was it. This was how it ended. They were going to take me, and Hawk was going to get arrested because he tried to help me, and it would all be my fault. I stood up, and Sarah immediately grabbed my arm. "Don't." "I have to. Your dad's going to get arrested because of me." "So what? He's been arrested before. He can handle it. But you going down there, giving yourself up? That's not what he wants." "It doesn't matter what he wants. I can't let him." The door to Sarah's room opened without warning, and we all jumped, but it was just Hawk, and his face was set in hard lines. Behind him on the stairs, I could see the social worker and the cop waiting. "Riley," Hawk said quietly, "I need you to come downstairs. They want to talk to you." My legs felt like water. "Are you getting arrested?" Something shifted in his expression, a flash of surprise that I'd been worried about that instead of myself. "Not yet, but that depends on what happens next." He held out his hand to me, and after a second's hesitation, I took it. His hand was rough and calloused and warm, and he squeezed my fingers gently. "I'm not going to let them take you anywhere you don't want to go," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear. "But you need to talk to them, okay? You need to tell them what happened. Tell them the truth." We walked downstairs together, his hand steady in mine, his daughters following behind us like a protective wall. The social worker and the officer were standing in the living room, and they both turned to look at me as I came down the stairs. The social worker, Jennifer Morrison, was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun and tired eyes that had probably seen too many kids in bad situations. The officer was the same one from last night, the younger cop who'd questioned us at the bar. "Hello, Riley," the social worker said with a practiced, gentle smile. "My name is Jennifer. I'm here to help you." I didn't say anything, just held onto Hawk's hand tighter. "Can you tell me what happened? Why you ran away from the Henderson home?" The words stuck in my throat. I'd told this story before, to Mrs. Henderson, to a teacher at school, and nobody had believed me. Why would this time be different? "She already told people what happened," Hawk said when I didn't answer. "She told Mrs. Henderson that her husband was being inappropriate. Nobody did anything about it. I'd like to hear it from Riley, if that's okay." Jennifer looked at me expectantly. I took a breath and forced the words out. "Mr. Henderson would come into my room at night. He'd sit on my bed and touch my hair and tell me I was pretty. His hands would... He'd touch my shoulder, my back, and he'd stay longer each time. And I knew what was coming next. So I told Mrs. Henderson, and she said I was lying, that I was trying to destroy their family. And then she put a lock on my door, but the lock was on the outside." My voice cracked on the last words, and I felt Sarah's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. Jennifer's expression had shifted, professional mask slipping to show something more human underneath. Anger, maybe, or disgust. "Did he ever touch you inappropriately, sexual areas?" "Not yet, but he was going to. I could feel it. Feeling like something might happen isn't the same as..." "Don't." Hawk's voice was quiet, but deadly. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. She's 13. She told you an adult man was coming into her room at night and touching her. And you're about to suggest that wasn't enough to justify running. Think very carefully about what you're saying right now." Jennifer closed her mouth, and I watched her actually take a moment to think. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You're right. I apologize, Riley. What you described is inappropriate behavior, and you should have been protected. You should have been believed." The validation hit me like a physical thing, and my eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. "So, what happens now?" Hawk asked. "You take her, stick her in another foster home, hope for the best?" "Our protocol requires..." "I don't care about your protocol. I care about that kid right there. What happens to her?" Jennifer looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with something. "Mr. Daniels, can I speak with you privately for a moment?" Hawk looked at me, and I nodded slightly. He squeezed my hand once more, and then let go, following Jennifer into the kitchen. The officer stayed in the living room with us, but he looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Sarah moved to stand next to me, her presence solid and reassuring. "Whatever happens, we've got your back," she whispered. From the kitchen, I could hear low voices, Hawk and Jennifer talking. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone shifting, becoming less adversarial. After what felt like forever, they came back out. Hawk's expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in his eyes that might have been hope. "Okay, Riley," Jennifer said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to file a formal investigation into the Henderson home based on your allegations. That's going to take time, probably a few weeks. In the meantime, I need to place you somewhere safe." My stomach dropped. Here it came, the part where she took me away. "Normally," Jennifer continued, "that would mean emergency foster care. But Mr. Daniels has made a proposal, and after some consideration, I'm willing to try something a little unorthodox." I looked at Hawk, who was watching Jennifer with intense focus. Mr. Daniels has offered to undergo emergency foster certification. It's an expedited process for situations like this. If he passes the background check and home study, which frankly shouldn't be a problem, he can become your temporary foster parent while we investigate your case. It's not standard procedure, but she paused. But I've been doing this job for 8 years, and I've learned that sometimes the rule book needs to be flexible if it means keeping a kid safe. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what she was saying. Hawk wanted to foster me? To go through the whole process? To officially take responsibility for me? There are conditions, Jennifer continued. I'll be checking in regularly. Weekly visits, minimum. Riley will need to start school, see a therapist, follow all the standard requirements for foster care. And if at any point I think this arrangement isn't working, I pull the plug. Understood? Understood, Hawk said firmly. And Riley? Jennifer looked at me. Is this what you want? Do you feel safe here with Mr. Daniels and his family? I looked around the living room at this family that had taken me in. At Hawk, who'd lied to police for me and was now offering to fight through bureaucracy to keep me safe. At Sarah, who understood what I'd been through because she'd lived it herself. At Maya and Emma, who'd accepted me without question because their dad said I needed help. Yes, I whispered. I feel safe here. Jennifer nodded slowly. Okay then, I'll start the paperwork today. In the meantime, Riley stays here, but this is technically a supervised placement, which means Officer Chen here will need to file a report confirming the current living conditions are appropriate. The young officer looked startled to suddenly be part of the conversation. Yeah, sure. The house looks fine, clean, safe, appropriate. Good. Jennifer pulled out a business card and handed it to Hawk. My cell number's on there. Any problems? Any concerns? You call me immediately. I'll be back in 3 days to check on things and start the home study process. She turned to me one more time. Riley, if you ever feel unsafe here or if you need anything, you can call me too. Day or night, okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice, and just like that, it was over. Jennifer and Officer Chen left, and we all stood in the living room staring at each other, trying to process what had just happened. Did that really just happen? Maya asked, breaking the silence. Riley staying? She's staying, Hawk confirmed. Emma launched herself at me, wrapping her small arms around my waist in a fierce hug. I told you my dad would fix it, she said, her voice muffled against my stomach. And that's when I finally started crying. Not quiet tears, not the kind you can hide. Big, ugly sobs that shook my whole body. 47 days of fear and pain and loneliness finally breaking through the walls I'd built around myself. Hawk pulled me into a hug, and his daughters surrounded us, and for the first time since I could remember, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that across town, Michael Henderson was packing a bag. He'd heard through his wife that CPS was investigating him, that some runaway girl had made accusations, and Michael Henderson was not the kind of man who stuck around to face consequences. But he was the kind of man who believed in tying up loose ends. And I was a loose end. 3 weeks had passed since CPS showed up at Hawk's door, and I was starting to believe that maybe life could actually be okay. I know that sounds dramatic, but when you've spent 47 days thinking you might die in a doorway, 3 weeks of safety feels like a miracle. I had my own room with clean sheets and a door that locked from the inside. I had regular meals, hot showers, and a family that actually wanted me around. Sarah helped me with homework every night. Maya taught me how to play her video games and only got a little annoyed when I died constantly. Emma insisted I tuck her in at bedtime because she said I told the best stories. And Hawk? He was patient in a way I didn't know dads could be. He never pushed me to talk about the hard stuff, but he was always there when I needed him, teaching me how to change oil on his bike, making sure I ate breakfast, checking on me at night when I woke up from nightmares, just sitting quietly in the doorway until I fell back asleep. The home study had gone smoothly. Jennifer, the social worker, seemed genuinely pleased with the placement. I'd started therapy with Dr. Chen, a woman with kind eyes who never made me feel broken or damaged, and I'd enrolled in school, which was terrifying but also weirdly normal in a way I'd forgotten existed. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was starting to hope, starting to believe that maybe this could be permanent, that maybe I'd found a real home. That's when Michael Henderson came back. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was walking home from school with Sarah. The November cold had deepened into December, and Christmas decorations were starting to appear on houses in the neighborhood. Sarah was telling me about some drama with her friend group when I saw the car, a dark blue sedan, parked across the street from Hawk's house. Engine running, exhaust puffing white clouds into the cold air. And behind the wheel, a face I'd seen in my nightmares for 47 days. Michael Henderson. I stopped walking so suddenly that Sarah bumped into me. "Riley, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at that car, at that face, at the man who'd stolen my sense of safety and made me run into the winter night. Henderson was watching the house. He hadn't seen us yet, hadn't noticed two teenage girls standing frozen on the sidewalk half a block away. His attention was fixed on the front door, like he was waiting for something, waiting for someone, waiting for me. "Riley, you're scaring me. What is it?" Sarah followed my gaze and saw the car. "Do you know that guy?" "Henderson," I whispered. "That's Michael Henderson." Sarah's whole body went rigid. She grabbed my arm and started pulling me backward, away from the house, away from the car. "We need to call Dad, right now." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands and hit a speed dial. It rang twice before Hawk picked up. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Dad, we're about a block from the house, and there's a car parked outside. Riley says it's Michael Henderson, the guy from the foster home." The line went silent for a heartbeat. When Hawk spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. "Where are you exactly?" "Corner of Maple and 5th. We're behind the big oak tree." "Stay there. Don't move. Don't go near the house. I'm 5 minutes out. I'm calling the cops right now." The line went dead, and Sarah immediately called someone else. "Raven? Yeah, it's Sarah. We have a situation. Riley's foster dad is outside our house." "Yeah, that foster dad. Dad's on his way, but we might need backup. Thanks." She hung up and looked at me, and I could see she was scared but trying to hide it. "Dad's crew is coming too. Henderson's not getting anywhere near you, I promise." But I wasn't worried about me. Well, I was, but that wasn't the main thing making my heart race. "Maya and Emma, are they home?" Sarah's face went pale. "Oh God. Yeah, they get off the bus at 3. They're probably already inside." And they were alone. Alone in that house with a man outside who'd driven here for one reason: to make sure I couldn't testify against him, to make sure I stayed quiet. "We have to warn them," I said. "Dad said to stay here." "Sarah, he's outside your house. If he goes in, if he hurts them because of me..." My voice cracked. I couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah looked at the car, then at me, and I watched her make a decision. Okay, we're calling them." She dialed again, and I could hear it ringing, and ringing, and ringing. No answer. "They probably can't hear it," Sarah said, but her voice was shaking now. "They blast music when they get home from school. Dad's always getting after them about it. The car door opened. Michael Henderson stepped out onto the street, and my whole body went cold. He was exactly like I remembered. Average height, average build, the kind of man who could blend into any crowd. That's what made him dangerous. He looked normal, looked safe, looked like someone you'd trust with your kids. He was wearing jeans and a jacket, and his hands were in his pockets. He looked around the street once, casual, like he was just a guy checking out the neighborhood. Then he started walking toward the house. "No," I whispered. No. Sarah was already dialing 911. "Yes, this is an emergency. There's a man approaching my house. He's a wanted suspect. My sisters are inside alone. 375 Maple Street. Please hurry." But Henderson was already at the front door. I watched him try the handle. It was locked. He knocked, loud and official sounding. Inside the house, I could see movement through the front window. Someone coming to answer the door. Please don't be Emma, I thought. Please don't be tiny, fierce Emma, who trusted everyone and believed her dad could fix anything. The door opened. It was Maya, her curly hair wild around her face, probably expecting a delivery or a neighbor. She said something I couldn't hear from this distance. Henderson replied. Maya started to close the door. Henderson's foot shot out, blocking it. And that's when everything happened at once. Sarah started running toward the house, screaming for her sisters. I ran after her because there was no way I was letting her face him alone. Henderson pushed into the house, and I heard Maya scream. A motorcycle engine roared around the corner, way too fast, and I recognized Hawk's bike before I even saw him clearly. He didn't slow down, didn't park properly, just dropped the bike in the middle of the street and was running toward his house before it even finished sliding across the pavement. "Get away from my daughters!" Hawk's voice was a roar that probably carried 3 blocks. Henderson appeared in the doorway, and he had Maya. His arm was around her shoulders. Not quite violent, but definitely restraining, and Maya's face was white with terror. "I just want to talk to Riley," Henderson called out, and his voice was so reasonable, so calm. Like he was asking for a cup of sugar instead of using a 12-year-old girl as leverage. "Just a conversation. Then I'll leave. Nobody needs to get hurt." Hawk stopped about 20 feet from his front door, and I could see him fighting for control. Every muscle in his body was tensed like a coiled spring, but his voice when he spoke was level. "Let her go, Henderson. Whatever you came here for, it's not worth this." I need Riley to understand that she made a mistake, that she misunderstood what happened. Kids do that sometimes, you know? They misinterpret innocent actions. "There was nothing innocent about it," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. I'd stopped next to Hawk, and Sarah was on his other side. "You know exactly what you were doing, what you were planning to do." Henderson's eyes found me, and there was nothing reasonable in them now, just cold calculation and anger. "You destroyed my life. My wife left me. CPS is investigating me. I lost my job, all because of your lies." "They weren't lies. They were lies!" He shouted it, and Maya flinched. His arm tightened around her, and she made a small sound of fear. "I was nice to you. I gave you a home, and you repaid me by making up disgusting stories. Let the girl go." Hawk's voice cut through Henderson's rant like a blade. "Right now, let Maya go, and we can talk about this like adults." "Like adults?" Henderson laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "Adults like you? Who harbor runaways? Who interfere with CPS cases? You're as bad as she is, poisoning good people's reputations with false accusations." Behind Henderson, I could see Emma's small face peeking around the corner from the hallway. She'd heard the commotion. She was seeing her sister being held by a stranger, and her 8-year-old brain was trying to figure out what to do. I caught her eye and shook my head slightly. "Stay there," I tried to communicate. "Stay hidden." But Emma had never been good at staying hidden when someone she loved was in danger. She ran at Henderson from behind, small fists pummeling his legs, screaming, "Let go of my sister! Let go!" Henderson jerked in surprise, his grip on Maya loosening just enough. Maya twisted free and bolted, running straight to her dad. Hawk caught her and pushed her behind him in one smooth motion, his body now a wall between Henderson and his daughters. Henderson grabbed for Emma, but she was already dancing backward, and that's when Hawk moved. I've seen a lot of things in my life, but I'd never seen anyone move that fast. 1 second, Hawk was standing next to me. The next, he was on Henderson, one hand gripping his jacket, the other pulled back in a fist that looked like it could break concrete. "Dad, don't!" Sarah screamed. "The cops are coming! Don't do something you'll regret!" Hawk froze with his fist inches from Henderson's face. Every line of his body was screaming violence, but he didn't throw the punch. Instead, he shoved Henderson backward, hard enough that the man stumbled and fell on the front lawn. "You came to my house," Hawk said, his voice low and dangerous. "You threatened my daughters. You tried to silence a kid who had the courage to speak up about what you did to her. And you want to talk about lies? About reputations?" Henderson was trying to get up, but Hawk put a boot on his chest. Not hard, but enough to keep him down. "Here's what's going to happen," Hawk continued. "The cops are going to arrive any second now. You're going to be arrested for breaking and entering, assault, terroristic threats, and probably a few other charges I'm not creative enough to think of. And that investigation CPS is doing? It just got a whole lot more serious because you just proved exactly the kind of man you are." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Henderson's face was pale now, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. "I didn't hurt anyone," he said weakly. "I just wanted to talk. You put your hands on my daughter. You came here to intimidate a 13-year-old witness. That's not talking. That's attempting to obstruct justice." 3 police cars screeched to a stop in front of the house, and officers poured out with weapons drawn. Hawk stepped back slowly, hands up, letting them take over. They pulled Henderson to his feet, cuffed him, read him his rights. The reasonable mask was completely gone now, and he was yelling about false accusations and conspiracy, and how this was all a misunderstanding. Nobody was listening. One of the officers approached us, and I recognized him as Officer Chen from the night at the bar and the morning at the house. "Everyone okay here?" "My daughters are shaken up but unharmed," Hawk said, his arm around Maya and Emma now. Sarah had moved to stand next to me, her hand finding mine. "Riley here is the one Henderson was really after. She's the victim in his CPS case." Officer Chen looked at me, his expression serious. "Did he threaten you directly?" "He said he wanted to talk to me, to make me understand I'd made a mistake about what happened." I was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving me cold and scared. But I didn't make a mistake. I know what happened. I know what he was doing. "I believe you," Officer Chen said quietly. "And after today, I think a lot of other people are going to believe you too. Men who are innocent don't show up at witnesses' houses. They don't threaten children. They cooperate with investigations." They loaded Henderson into the back of a police car, and I watched him go with a feeling I couldn't quite name. Relief? Vindication? Closure? Maybe all 3 mixed together. Jennifer, my social worker, arrived 20 minutes later, probably called by the police. She took statements from all of us, checked to make sure Maya and Emma were okay,
and then pulled me aside. "Riley, I want you to know that as of right now, the investigation into Michael Henderson just became criminal. The district attorney's office will be getting involved. They'll want your testimony." My stomach clenched. "Testimony? Like in court?" "Eventually, yes, but you won't be alone. We'll prepare you, get you a victim's advocate, make sure you have support every step of the way." She paused. "And Riley, you did nothing wrong. Not when you ran, not when you told the truth, and not today. You hear me? Nothing wrong." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "How's the placement going?" Jennifer asked, looking over at where Hawk was sitting on the front steps with his daughters, all of them huddled together. "Still feeling safe here?" I watched Hawk pull Emma into his lap, watched Sarah rest her head on his shoulder, watched Maya grip his hand like she'd never let go. He'd been willing to fight for them, had been willing to sacrifice his own freedom to protect them, and he'd done the same for me. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it with everything in me. "I feel safe here. If you've stuck with this story all the way to the end, I want you to know something. This story is about more than just one girl and one family. It's about what happens when someone decides to show up for a kid nobody else wanted to protect. It's about chosen family and second chances and the courage it takes to speak your truth even when nobody believes you. Hit that subscribe button if this story meant something to you, because I share stories about real people doing real things to make the world a little less terrible. And drop a comment telling me about a time someone showed up for you when you needed it most." Jennifer left, the police eventually cleared out, and we all went inside. Hawk ordered pizza because nobody had the energy to cook, and we ate it sitting on the living room floor, still processing what had happened. "So," Maya said around a mouthful of pepperoni, "that was intense." "That's one word for it," Sarah muttered. Emma was quiet, still pressed against Hawk's side like she was afraid to let him out of her sight. "Dad? Is the bad man going to come back?" "No, baby. He's going to jail. Probably for a long time. He's not coming back." "Good." Emma looked at me with those serious 8-year-old eyes. "Riley, you're staying forever now, right? Like, officially?" Forever. Such a big word. Such a scary word when you'd learned that nothing lasted forever, that homes were temporary, and families could disintegrate, and safety was always one bad decision away from disappearing. But looking around that living room at these people who'd fought for me, who'd risked things for me, who'd made space in their lives and their hearts for a scared kid in a doorway, I thought maybe forever was possible after all. "If you guys will have me," I said quietly. "Yeah, I'd like to stay." "Oh, we're keeping you," Maya announced. "You're like the sister I actually get along with." "No offense, Sarah." "Some taken," Sarah replied, but she was smiling. Hawk caught my eye and nodded, just once, but there was a promise in it. A promise that I had a home here for as long as I needed it. Maybe forever, if that's what I wanted. 3 months later, the Henderson case went to court. I testified, with Hawk sitting in the courtroom behind me and Jennifer by my side. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, standing up in front of strangers and detailing exactly what had happened. Exactly what I'd felt in those dark nights when Henderson came into my room. But Michael Henderson went to prison for 12 years on multiple charges, including what he'd done at Hawk's house that day. And I walked out of that courtroom knowing I'd been believed, knowing I'd been protected, knowing I'd survived. 6 months after that, Hawk officially adopted me. The paperwork took forever, but the day the judge signed off on it, making me legally and permanently Riley Daniels, was the best day of my life. We celebrated at the Iron Horse, surrounded by Hawk's crew and Jennifer and Dr. Chen and everyone who'd been part of the journey. Raven made a toast about misfits and strays finding their pack, and I cried happy tears for the first time in my life. That night, back at home, I stood in the doorway of my room, the room that was mine now, in the house that was home now, with the family that was forever now. And I thought about that scared girl who'd been dying in a doorway 57 weeks ago. She'd survived. Not just survived, but found something better than survival. She'd found a place to belong. Hawk appeared in the hallway, probably checking on me like he did every night. "You okay, kid?" "Yeah," I said, and I smiled. "I'm really okay." He smiled back, that rare, full smile that transformed his entire face. "Good. Get some sleep. Emma's already planning your birthday party for next month. And knowing her, it's going to be exhausting." "Dad?" I said, trying out the word. We'd been practicing, but it still felt new and strange and wonderful in my mouth. He paused, and something soft entered his expression. "Yeah? Thank you for everything. For stopping that night, for believing me, for fighting for me. Just thank you." Hawk walked over and pulled me into a hug, the kind of hug that felt safe and permanent and real. "You don't have to thank me for doing what any decent human should do, but you're welcome anyway. Now get some sleep. You've got school tomorrow." He left, pulling the door mostly closed, but leaving it cracked open just how I liked it, just enough that light from the hallway spilled in and kept the darkness away. I climbed into bed, my bed, in my room, in my home, with my family sleeping in the other rooms around me. And for the first time in 13 years of life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Sometimes the system fails kids. Sometimes people look away when they should stand up. Sometimes girls have to sleep in doorways because nobody protected them when they asked for help. But sometimes, if you're really lucky, a stranger stops their motorcycle in the rain and decides you're worth saving. And that stranger becomes a father, and his daughters become your sisters. And suddenly, you have a whole crew of people who'll fight for you when the world gets dark. I was one of the lucky ones. And yeah, I know not every story ends like this. I know there are still kids out there sleeping in doorways, running from things they should never have to run from, telling truths nobody wants to hear. I know the system is broken and the world is hard, and sometimes bad people win. But sometimes good people show up. Sometimes they fight. Sometimes they make room in their lives for one more lost kid who needs a place to belong. So if you're out there and you're that kid, hiding in doorways, or hurting in silence, or thinking nobody cares, I want you to know something. You deserve to be protected. You deserve to be believed. You deserve a home and a family and people who fight for you. And somewhere out there, maybe there's a Hawk waiting to find you. Maybe there's a Sarah who understands. Maybe there's a Maya and Emma ready to make you their sister. Don't give up. Keep fighting. Keep surviving. Your forever might be just around the corner. Thank you so much for watching Riley's story. If it touched you, please hit like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you know a kid who needs help, be their Hawk. Be the person who shows up. Be the difference between surviving and thriving. Drop a comment below and let me know what you thought of this journey. Until next time, take care of each other out there.